Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Human Factor Security Podcast with me, your host, Jenny Radcliffe, the People Hacker. I'm delighted to welcome my guest on for this episode. Robert Brooker is currently the head of fraud and forensic at PKF, in tandem with being in his 16th year as the chairman of the London Fraud Forum. Welcome to the show, Rob.
Thank you, Jen, for having me on. I'm delighted. Absolute privilege and honour. Looking forward to it.
Oh, no, I mean, it's all mine. And, you know, I've had a couple of fraud professionals on, as you know, Peter Taylor's been on, we've had Martina Dove on,
yeah.
and yourself. I mean, that's my holy trinity of sort of fraud professionals. I mean, I suppose I want to get a little bit into some of, a little bit of the past, the other places you've worked and what you've sort of seen over your career, Rob. But first of all, I mean, we're just sort of starting, hopefully, to come out of lockdown in the UK. What's this last year been like in terms of fraud? What did the pandemic bring? What did you see sort of across your desk and for the members of the forum that the pandemic brought?
It's amazing, Jen, wasn't it, really? It's unprecedented in every way, shape or form, from us being in lockdown to people being furloughed. We never heard of the word furlough, have we? No. Let alone people are committing fraud against furlough. There's an example straight away. How can you be fraudulently claiming furlough? So you've got companies out there who have either devised themselves as a company to claim furlough payments for staff, or they've got guys that are on furlough, but they're getting them to work on kind of like call outs and things of that nature. That's one area that amazed me. I'd never heard of the word furlough, and let alone the fraudsters are out there on it straight away. How can we make a quick buck? I mean, it was just ridiculous. The bounce back loan scheme, obviously awful, not great either. People borrowing 50,000 quid, not necessarily a legitimate company or otherwise. What are they doing with that 50,000 quid? What will happen now as we come out of it? What will happen with that £50,000 that they've borrowed? If you don't pay it back, are the banks going to chase them all? Will they pursue it? I don't know, Jen. I'm really not sure, Jenny, what they will do. And there's an awful lot of money tied up in it. But I had an interesting conversation this week. You mentioned the fraud forum, and I'll talk about it a bit later. But I had an interesting conversation with somebody this week from HMRC. And the biggest fraud they've seen during the last year is around the Eat Out to Help Out scheme. I mean, you can't believe it, can you? So how does that work, I said, thinking it was all really quite simple. We go out and eat a meal, we get a discount, and the government pay the balance. Believe it or not, the discount for Eat Out to Help Out was like Monday to Wednesday, if memory serves me correctly.
Yes.
They would then get busy at a weekend and chuck it all into the Monday to Wednesday figures so they could claim back the money.
Of course. Oh.
We had others whereby, by all accounts, they created that they had a restaurant. They had a takeaway, but they didn't have a restaurant. Wow. And then you had others who have created that they've even had. So they've extended, it's a bit like the old invoice fraud, basically inflating it and said that you and I have spent 100 quid when we spent 25 quid or whatever. And you just don't realise that the people out there just saw this as an opportunity to take advantage. And that's what's happened over the last year, unfortunately. People, I appreciate why. We all know that the lockdown brought, as we said, redundancies. It brought financial crisis to an extent that we're going to be picking up for the next however many years. And people felt desperate. And we all know, and you know this, desperate times calls for desperate measures. And ultimately, that's what people jumped on and saw. And just think about it. It all started with PPE.
Yeah.
Whoever knew there was such a market for PPE? And we had
remember
people...
Frankie Boyle saying, the comedian Frankie Boyle saying, there's been so much art and culture and films and books written about the apocalypse. And he said, and I don't know what I thought it'd look like, but I didn't think it'd look like pasta shortages and PPE.
Well, it's right though, isn't it? It's George Orwell. We all know the story of George Orwell and kind of 1980 and whatever, 1984 and whatever. And he was totally right. Here we were in that pandemic and suffering from it. And we had people saying they could get PPE when they couldn't. We had people saying that they had PPE that wasn't fit for purpose. Yeah. You could breathe through the mask or the gloves by all accounts, put your hand in it and your hand went straight through the glove, etc. But that's how it all started. But in the fraud world, you know, fraud risk management side of it, what we all reading's happened over the last 12 months in government. Look at David Cameron and Greensill. Look at Hancock and obviously the company that him and his sister have got shares in. And ultimately, the tone begins with the top. Everybody realised there was a fast buck to be made with PPE and they tried it. I worked on behalf of
I mean, I was going to say, just does it still like shock you though, even after all these years in the game, when you hear how quickly they adapt? And you know, you've just said there, you know, there were people whilst the rest of the world was sad and frightened and panicking and helping each other, and it was all rainbows and banana bread. Did you, you know, does it still? It's. I feel like something that's lovely about you is that I think it still shocks you.
Yeah,
And
it
still
does.
makes you sort of sick that some people, whilst all that's going on, some people are going, "Oh, how can we make some money?"
That's exactly it. Shock me, no, because
Mm,
we've seen it all now. And
mm,
nothing will ever surprise me after 25 years in the game, Jenny. I
no,
really don't. And for those that don't know, I am a fraud man through and through. I've done nothing else in my career. So
we're going to
it's
go
only
through
fraud.
your career. Talk about it, but
I didn't wake up one day and say I'm going to work in
so it
fraud.
doesn't.
That I
It
can
doesn't
tell you.
surprise you. It doesn't shock you, but
Doesn't surprise me, but it really upsets me that people take advantage.
mm,
Now, you and I know we can go back to why that is. And we talk about internal control, we talk about motivation, we talk about rationalization, but the biggest one is opportunity. We
mm,
provided people with that opportunity as a government, as a UK nation. We thought we were helping everyone with how quickly we brought everything in. And do you know what? I wouldn't sit here and be critical. They did a great job. But unfortunately, the fraudsters realised that they are tuned to it. And before, like anything we've always said, Denny and fraudsters, they're one step ahead of us.
yeah.
They were 3 or 4 steps ahead of anyone else with regards to the last 12 months. And that's where we are. So shock, no, sad, gutted. Some horrible stories coming out of it. People lost an awful lot of
There
money.
really is, and it's
Really is.
sometimes it's not even just the money, is it? With fraud, I mean, you know, like I said, do you want to touch about the forum and go through your career a little bit? Because I know you, like you say, you've seen it all in 25 years in the game, and one of the most respected fraud professionals in the world, I'm sure. But I mean,
It's very kind of you to say.
well, it's right. But I mean, do you ever think, I mean, when that all, I know we didn't see it come, like you said, I remember the first time people were saying furlough, and I'm going, what now? What? And now it's just in our language, isn't it? But did you kind of think, oh God, what are they going to do with this? I mean, I know you couldn't think of exactly what they were going to do, but did you go, I know that this is going to be an opportunity now?
Yeah, I don't
You
mind
kind of just
admitting.
waiting for it to hit. What are they going to do with it?
I don't mind admitting. Once I'd Googled what furlough meant, I then thought, crikey, what are they going to do with this? I'd never heard of it. Didn't mean anything to me. But how quickly the fraudsters jumped onto it.
I always think that if people like that put their mind to legitimate
Oh.
entrepreneurship, or it's sort of, this is that phrase that I've just said there is something that at every fraud conference I've ever spoken at every gig I've ever done, at sooner or later we all say, if only they put their mind to legitimate business, they'd all be millionaires and benefit society. Do you think after all these years in the game that there's, you know, and I know the circumstances that lead people to commit crime and to commit fraud, and like you say, opportunity, temptation is something that I would even go further and say it's opportunity and then temptation. You know,
Yeah.
it's hard. But do you think there's some people who just are predisposed to it? It's such a huge question, nature or nurture. But do you think some people just could have had everything and still would
we
do it?
still get it. I mean, I'm sure Peter told you about it. I had a conversation with Peter, the fraud guy Taylor, yesterday, who, by the way, is a great advocate as well in our world and does some great work. And he was telling me yesterday he did some research around actual fraudsters and people that have actually committed fraud. And he actually had people coming to him that hadn't committed fraud. It was like Munchausen's disease of the fraud world. He had 2 people who actually came to him say, yes, I'm a fraudster. So we're sitting here talking about it and thinking, hang on a minute, what do you mean? So he said, basically, they saw it as a quick buck to be made. I'm doing some research. I'm interested in what motivated you, what the temptation was, what your rationalization was. And so he had 2 people. And basically, this guy said, well, I thought I could make a quick few quid. So there we are, advertising for fraudsters. Peter's looking at them to get some insight into them, do some research. Actually, they're taking advantage of trying to be a fraudster and make some money out of it. You couldn't make it up.
Do you know what, though? That's true. There's people in the business say the social engineers, and the only social engineering they've ever done, but it's quite successful, is to convince the rest of the industry, almost, that they're social engineers.
Well,
Because
exactly.
they've
And
not
you
done
know
the
this.
job. They've not done the job. They've not done the work. They're not. But the way I say is like, I've got some recipe books, and I've watched TV shows, And I've even had a go at making a loaf of bread, but I wouldn't say I was a baker. Do you know
No,
what I mean?
it's quite
It's
right.
like I
I'll tell
can't
you
say
one
I'm a
thing you are,
master
though.
chef.
You are a bloody good social engineer, Jenny, and you know that. And she's the best. She really is. Some of the stuff we've learned over the years, it's all basics, isn't it? But standing outside having a cigarette, Jenny talked about that probably 10 years ago now.
Yeah.
But you know what? It's so true.
It's
You gain access
ubiquitous
to a
now.
building.
Yeah.
And that's how you do it. And she taught, it's old hat now, but actually, well, only because none of us are going in a building, but you know what I mean.
People have asked me, talking about this COVID adaptations for fraud, people ask me to do adaptations for physical pen tests, and they'd say, can you do a COVID test, even in the middle of it? I mean, I think it sort of shows that people don't necessarily, that the public and people who don't work in the industry don't necessarily understand how it works. Because I said, well, yes, I can wear a mask and there's less security, but there will only be one person in that building, me. That will be a giveaway.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you think there's still, I mean, I don't mean in real life when it happens to people, but I think in terms of films and things, there's still a bit of a romanticizing of, of sort of fraudsters. It's like of con artists. I mean, I'm thinking the case that Anna Delvey, Anna Sorokin. I spoke to Pete about this and said I posted something. I see no talent there. I just see someone, Pete said it, I commented on a post I put on actually, and he said, some of them make you smile, some of the things that they get up to. I mean, it makes you don't admire it, but they are cheeky sometimes, and sort of like that. People pretending to be fraudsters to make money talking about fraud is kind of makes me smile a little bit.
It does. But it's a bit of an oxymoron, isn't it? But it does work. It does. There's many out there. There are many out there that think it's a glamorous world. They think they really do live the life. And let's be honest, we've all seen the stories. I mean, Madoff passed away this week or last week, but actually, you and I know that man lived the life. And there's many other people out there, some still underneath the parapet, if you like, and hiding. They're living the life and they're committing fraud all the time. They're running fraud rings. They're not getting their own hands dirty. These guys don't do that. It's serious organised crime, and it's what else it feeds. And that's the ironic bit of it. They see it as victimless. They don't see that anyone's really lost. Oh, the bank will reimburse them. The government will reimburse them. No one's losing money. Let me tell you guys, we all know this. Jenny knows it better than me. We are losing money. There are victims, and it has a desperate impact on people. And as Jenny said, it's not just the money. It's what that does then for loss of confidence in a product or a service as an organization, what it can do to an individual, how much that hurts that individual for a long time, and trying to speak to them. I'm working on a bit of identity fraud at the moment, Jenny, and looking into identity fraud and looking at victims, trying to get a victim of identity fraud to speak about it. It's just the most humiliating thing, isn't it? It's an old saying, if you get burgled, don't go looking for your TV or anything in this day and age. Make sure you got your passport, make sure you got your driving license, and make sure your utility bills are still in a pile on the side, because that's your identity. And the minute your identity's gone, it's gone. I dealt with a lady just recently, mobile phones. It sounds ridiculous. She had 12, 15 mobile phones delivered to her property at various times. She'd never, ever ordered a mobile phone. Wow. Never, ever. But they were being delivered time after time in different names to her property. Basically, it gives them a credit record to set up and have these different names. And the work you have to put in to search in Experian, Equifax, TransUnion, Call Credit, etc., to try and do that and see who's got what. And she said day by day, another one appeared somewhere. And she had another credit reference against her. And the most difficult bit, trying to repair that damage. That's the flip side of it, isn't it? These guys think they're living the life, and they do. The boats, the yachts, the cars, whatever it might be.
They can't think about it. You can't think about the victim. I think a lot of the time they don't let themselves, because surely, but then again, maybe not. But like a lot, I think if you let yourself think about it for too long, you wouldn't do it. So I just think either they don't care at all, psychopathy, sociopathy, or they just dismiss it, because if you thought about it for even a minute, then
I'm with the former. You've got a role to play in your own life, and you do it. You and I, you go back, where has fraud developed? How have we developed? We call it a scam, we call it fraud, call it what you like. Actually, the old-fashioned day of going into a bank for you and I and withdrawing cash is gone. We don't do it. Everything's done. We used to call it cyber-enabled fraud. It's now known as cyber fraud.
Yeah.
That's how much the game's transferred and where we're at now. And ultimately, in the old days, you and I would go and take cash out. The bad boys would go in a mask and hold up a bank. When do you ever hear of that? Or a G4S van? When do you ever hear of that nowadays? You don't. Do you know why? I can sit at home in my front room on a laptop, committing more fraud and more money than ever before. And actually, I haven't even got my hands dirty. I'm sitting in the comfort of my own home.
Let's go back a little bit though, because for you to know that you have been, like you say, for all your life, did you always know you wanted to go into this? Were you thinking about the police maybe, or how did you get into it? And
No, so basically I started off in local government like many people. Started off in local government, and one day the head of revenue and finance came to me and said, I was head of recovery in a local authority. For those of you, that it's basically a bailiff. I was certified bailiff with the county court, etc. And we run that, and we would collect what was business rates and kind of like poll tax and all that kind of thing. And then obviously their outside companies could do it a lot cheaper. So he just come into the office one day, he said, right, you no longer are going to be a recovery team, we're outsourcing it. So I think he saw the shock on our faces, and he said, don't worry. What we're going to do is transfer you to fraud. Well, hold on, where's the synergy there? We're talking about synergy between cyber and fraud. Where's synergy? He said, it's simple. Government are basically getting everybody trained up. Fraud is a big thing now. Government are getting everyone trained up with something called PINs, if you remember, professionalism in security, all those years ago. So basically he said, this is what you're going to do. And from that day on, we became fraud people instead of becoming recovery people. And the rest, as they say, is history. No, I didn't wake up one day, Jen, sorry to disappoint you, and say, do you know what? I'm going to be a fraud champion. I'm going to fight fraud. I didn't do that. I didn't ever have the police thing either, really. I just got myself into local government, and then we fell into it that way, and I really enjoyed it. Actually, if I'm really honest, I enjoyed it. It was something to really enjoy.
But you stayed, so you must have. I was going to say you must have enjoyed it.
Yeah.
So I mean, what are the highs and lows of it? I suppose it's the highs that keep you in. And
yeah, and in the early days, you get disappointed. You get a job, you get it through in your own mind, you prepare it all, you get it all put together, hand it over to the police, and either at that stage it's thrown back at you and said, sorry, we're not taking it on, or you get to court and the baddie gets off, and then you're really down and kind of, what's this job all about? As you get older, you're a bit longer in the tooth, and actually just move on to the next job. You've got a dozen or more, if not 20, 30, 40 sitting on your desk, and you kind of ride through that and you don't see it and you kind of get it. The flip side of that is we all have a social conscience underneath it all, and we see some terrible, terrible stories. We see some terrible situations of people that have been defrauded. They don't have the proverbial pot left. They've had their account cleared out, and actually that's really quite sad. But the positive is just trying to work on that recovery of that loss, go after the fraudsters, looking at the asset tracing. Let's get some of that back for these great people who, unfortunately, let's be honest about it, could be you or me.
Is that what you say? What do you say to people who feel guilty about getting caught after all these years?
You're one of many. You're not alone in this. You're not the only one. That's the real hard bit. They think they're the only person at that time, and we all understand that. But you're not alone. And listen, these people wouldn't do it if they didn't have success. They would stop. We go back, and it was known as 419 scam back in the day, Jenny. As we all know now, is the letters, the emails, the text messages we're all receiving telling us that ultimately I need some money, or I want this or that or the other, whatever it might be. And it always back in the day originated from overseas. Nowadays it's in the UK. It could be anywhere in the world. But the reason they still do it, because they're still getting people pay. They're still getting people do this stuff. And why can't you believe? You just don't understand. There's a recent case, isn't there, in the High Court between Barclays and I believe the customer is called Philippe. And I apologise if I got that wrong. And it was an investment scam. And despite the bank, despite the police force knocking on their door and telling them it was a scam, they continued to pay money to the investment fraudsters. And the reason being, unfortunately, this is back in your world here, Jenny. You understand this better than I, but they believe this. They've been brainwashed to believe that this is real, this is going to happen. You shut yourself out between the fraudster, between the bank, between the police. They're wrong. They're wrong.
I put a quote up on Instagram the other day, and it says it's easier to con someone than to convince someone they've been conned.
Totally that, and that's a great.
don't want to. You just do not want to
admit that it's a con.
It.
And that you are throwing away your good money, despite what your family might have told you. And this is the other side of it, isn't it? As the fraud, it causes rifts in families.
I had a lady. Yes, go on. No, please. I was just going to say, especially romance fraud, but let's get on to that.
I had a lady I dealt with, and it was around PayPal. And I didn't realise PayPal have like the equivalent of credit, but it's all online. So you like a PayPal credit. And she said, I've got invoices, statements arriving all the time for me on a monthly basis or whatever, telling me it. And I just don't understand it. I don't get it. And when she was telling me this story, and she sent me some messages and some emails and that she'd received from their helpline, and we appreciate they're only bots, but ultimately they were trying to help her. I said to her, are you sure this isn't somebody in your family? And she said, well, on the family WhatsApp group, I've sent out and asking has somebody accidentally done it or whatever it might be. I said, well, this is a really hard conversation now, but you need to go back individually to the kids and to your husband and whatever. I said, it might be a coercive partner. I said, it might be they've got an addiction. We all know it could be gambling, it could be drugs, it could be alcohol. It might be an extramarital affair, whatever you need that money for. And do you know what? There was pleasure at the end of it, because actually she hadn't been a victim of fraud. She had been, unfortunately, a daughter had used her details to obtain credit for PayPal. Then the flip side of that hits home is why she's doing it. They've got a decent job. I don't understand it. Why do they need the money? And we talk through that side. But the relief could be seen. And you know this relief as well, Jenny, when people are arrested and done. It happens time and time again. And somebody you and I know is a fraudster. We both know him. And he basically worked for a company similar to mine in financial services, worked in accounts, had complete autonomy over accounts payable and accounts receivable, and over a 17-month period took 250,000 quid. On the day he was arrested, the company still weren't aware. The bank brought it to light because it raised suspicious activity report, a SAR, because of the volume of money going in this guy's account. But he said when the police knocked on his door, the first thing he said was, it's a relief. I'm so pleased that I've been caught. It becomes a habit. They can't stop doing it. They can't stop. Keep helping themselves. Keep doing it. Keep doing it. Keep doing it. The thing about that case was he got sentenced to 3 years imprisonment, by the way, guys. But the thing about that case was how much money was in that account when he was caught? All 250,000 quid. The reason why? Because I could. He was trying to prove a point to that organisation.
So, I mean, just kind of looking forward, Rob, I suppose you've seen it all over the years, but technology would be the thing that made the difference. I mean, when I first saw sort of social media and stuff, I thought, oh my God, people are just going to feed themselves to the lions. I mean, how did you sort of observe the rise in technology alongside the rise in fraud, and what sort of comments would you have on that?
It goes hand in glove, doesn't it? The rise in technology just increases and makes life easier. We talked about earlier being in a bank and that kind of was old hat. And then we're kind of all now working at home. Everything's done from a laptop, from an iPad. We mentioned earlier really briefly, but cyber-enabled fraud, which basically doesn't mean anything else but it's created on a device. You commit fraud on a device. You tell me what fraud nowadays isn't committed on a device. I think there's figures out there of 90% of fraud is cyber-enabled or cyber fraud. Because technology, and let's be honest, technology is just jumping. We think fraud grows, technology is growing quicker. Yeah. So when the technology grows, the fraudsters grow with it, and we're left yet another step behind where we are because we've got to keep up with it. We talk about, I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? You talked about Twitter, we talk about Facebook. We've all seen the frauds that happen on the marketplace. Facebook introduced Facebook Marketplace. Yeah. Look at it all. It's like eBay. Look at eBay and the amount of fraud going on. And then as that's developed, we're all sitting here thinking, what else could come next? But we know the technology's moving and we know it's getting quicker. Look at LinkedIn. We're all on it thinking it's a professional outfit. How many times do we read about fake profiles?
Now to the UK, where their domestic intelligence agency, MI5, is warning that some of the people that you may well have linked to on professional recruitment sites like LinkedIn might actually be spies.
About a guy who'd had his photograph used on numerous occasions, and then people were basically then putting it onto dating sites, and it's onto Facebook and everywhere else, and it's led to real problems in his personal life with his wife, saying, "That's not me. That really isn't me. This is me. That's my account, and that's it." But people just use it and abuse it, and that's the problem. And technology is there, isn't it? Look at eBay. Look at, we all thought there's so many different sites like eBay. And we were talking yesterday, Peter, Taylor and myself, we were talking about the darknet. And look at the darknet, right? So we're all talking about eBay. There is the equivalent on the darknet, as we all know. And you can obviously buy anything and everything on there.
Anything you like. I ended up on it. I was on it a few years ago. I didn't even know how I managed it. I've spoken to technical people who said, Jenny, I don't know how you managed to do it, but I was looking at tasers for personal protection. I had a job that with a dangerous individual coming up, and I was looking at tasers, and it was all set. And then I think I said to my husband, I didn't think I could buy that. And he went, hang on, you can't. We're not. I was like, what are you doing? And it was pink. I was buying a pink taser off Silk Road years ago.
But the problem is now, look at now, Peter was saying, the BBC have got a site on there.
Yeah.
I mean, so therefore, you've got that impression that I'm on a genuine type of site.
Absolutely.
And therefore, what chance do we have with technology? Because it is moving so quickly, it moves so fast, and it is unfortunately being used very much so in that organised crime world, and that's where fraud really takes off then.
I mean, I think the one thing I'd say on that, and just to sort of finish, is you've said what you say, but I'd ask you what you'd say, because what I say to people is, even though all the tech changes, the approaches are the same, the way they catch us out are the same, and in some ways the advice is the same. Even if it's a deep fake or something, if they start talking about money or getting you to act in a rush or emotional or you're scared, you just step back. I mean, would you add to that? Would you echo what I said? I mean, what stayed the same, and what advice would you give going forward?
Yeah, you've got to stay the same. You've got to be on your guard. We're all very cautious around text messages now that come through. We should all be cautious about emails that come through. Do you know what? It's no different if you're on social media. If you receive somebody slides into your DMs, as they say in these day and age, if somebody slides in there, be very careful. What is their motivation? What are they there for? Why do they want to be there? Yeah. And do you know what? The best advocate of that, and the best thing I can ever say, and it's the best campaign I think we've ever seen in our world, and that is Take 5. That Take 5 campaign is fantastic. Please, as Jenny mentioned, don't go upon your emotions or whatever it might be at the same time. And that old adage saying of, if it's too good to be true, it probably is.
It probably is.
No such thing as a free lunch, etc., guys. Please, whatever the technology, however they approach you. But it's about education and awareness, isn't it? Are we doing enough?
Yeah, and I mean, coming to that, and just to finish, you are, in your 16th year as chairman at the London Fraud Forum, and that's like a lot. Do you want to just talk a little bit and just kind of tell people what that is and what it can do for them before we finish?
Certainly. Thank you very much indeed for that opportunity, Jenny. People know I'm passionate about fraud. I'm certainly passionate about helping others and doing the right thing. And I got involved with the London Fraud Forum back in 2006, and it coincided with the Fraud Act being launched in 2006. For those of you who not know, that's a legislation that actually means there is something for fraud specifically, as opposed to it coming under the Theft Act or elsewhere. And at the time, the lead force wasn't the City of London. The lead force was the Met, and they had a prevention arm called Operation Sterling. And Operation Sterling set up trade industry fraud fora. I can give an example of one that's still around now, and fair play to Barry Gooch and all the guys over at Profit, prevention of fraud in travel, because there aren't many. And then they also set up regional fraud fora, and that was us. We were the London Fraud Forum. And as times evolved, some have come and gone. Fair play to Mr. Brown and Heslop, etc., up at the Northeast. The Northeast Fraud Forum still going on. We got a Yorkshire and Humber one that's a bit newer. The Midlands been going for a long time now, and they're doing well. And then I'm just, apart from the role, by the way, the role of the fraud forums is bringing private and public sectors together to fight fraud. So we'd have a website, publish many awareness briefings on the website, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, wherever it may be. hold events with great people like Jenny speaking on our behalf, getting that message out there to educate those that are in this world exactly what we can do, what are the emerging risks, what can we all do to collaborate and work together, which is also one of the large parts of the network, and that is networking, sharing best practice. If we all work together, it would be, there's a great saying, we all in our world, we come across the Data Protection Act. And I remember Stephen Head, ex-head of economic crime at the City of London Police, saying the problem was they brought in the Data Protection Act and it made everybody kind of clam up a little bit. If they'd have called it a Data Sharing Act, we'd probably be in a different place now. Such a true saying. So the Fraud Forums, we're a member-only organisation. We got 250 members in London. And it's going great, and we put on a lot of events for our members. It's quite cheap, a couple of £100 a year, or join during the year for 50 quid. And I've gone about a bit of a mission, if you like, to ensure that we have fraud fora regionally throughout the country. So we've just set up the Northwest, which obviously is in Jenny's area, and I know she's got herself involved, which is great to see. And I've done it all through the ROCUs, through the police, the regional organised crime units. And Shifa Chowdhury, big shout out to Shifa. She's really driven that Northwest Fraud Forum. They've done brilliantly with it. They're up and running. It's going well. And I'm in the throes of resurrecting 2 others that unfortunately had died a death over the last few years. One is the Eastern, and we got some great people on board already, and we'll have that up and running this year. And then the other is the Southwest, which is a massive geographical area. And I've got a huge shout out for the Southwest ROCU and the guys at Avon and Somerset Police. They are driving that, really helping us, and I can't wait for them all to be set up. When we've then got the whole country covered in fraud forums, all working together and collaborating, back to our point of raising awareness, educating people, networking, and giving the opportunity to learn best practice, share ideas, share technology, what's coming out, what's the emerging risks. Do you know what? That's the bigger picture for me, and I can't wait for it all to happen, because we're missing it and we need to be the go-to people.
Well, we'll put all the links to the fraud forums underneath this. I'll put the link to the London one as a little ticker coming underneath this interview, and we'll definitely put the links to all the forums in the show notes as well. But for now, it's been brilliant to interview you, Robert, and I'm sure we'll get you and Pete back on, maybe do a tinfoil half frauds edition with you guys on together, and maybe with Shifa as well. So, but for now, thanks so much for being a guest on the Human Factor Security Podcast.
Thank you very much indeed. Cheers, Jen.
Thanks, Robert.